Welcome. We've talked plenty about Elden Ring, so let's switch things up and talk about another series that our team loves, Bloodborne. Here are some interesting mysteries and fan theories about From Software's Bloodborne. Pale blood, the pale mystery behind the hunt. Seek pale blood to transcend the hunt. These are the cryptic words scrawled on a piece of parchment as the hunter awakens in Yharnam. From the very beginning of Bloodborne, pale blood is presented as an enigmatic goal of our journey. But just what is this pale blood? A type of blood? A person? A hidden truth? Well, the game never outright says, making it one of Yharnam's deepest lore mysteries. However, as lovers of lore and seekers of truth, the answers do somewhat come to us, if a bit cryptically hidden. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's start at the beginning. The blood minister in the beginning, in Yosefka's clinic, reacts as if he's heard the term. Oh yes, pale blood. Well, you've come to the right place. Yet, even a fellow outsider like Gilbert admits he's never heard of it, suggesting pale blood is no ordinary blood. The truth, however, buried in lore notes and developer hints, is that pale blood isn't a literal blood transfusion at all. It's something far more cosmic. As the night progresses, subtle clues begin to frame pale blood's meaning. After the hunter defeats Rom, the vacuous spider, the red blood moon descends, tinting the sky a violet purplish color. A messenger note found in Yahar Ghul exclaims, "Behold, a pale blood sky!" And indeed, the very sky has turned an interesting color, maybe not necessarily pale, but is said to be as pale as a body drained of blood, as one description puts it. This, of course, is one interpretation of pale blood, the paled sky signaling that the secret ritual of Mensis has been revealed and the hunt is nearing its climax. In fact, director Hidetaka Miyazaki hinted that seek pale blood could mean uncovering the hidden ritual and stopping it, symbolized by revealing that pale sky. The hunter, an outsider afflicted with some mysterious ailment, might have journeyed to Yharnam in search of this fabled pale blood cure, only to discover it refers to ending the nightmare itself. Yet an even more startling revelation comes from a note found much later. This note is found inside the lecture building, which is in of itself within the nightmare. It identifies pale blood with a specific being, the nameless moon presence, beckoned by Lawrence and his associates. Pale blood. This strongly suggests that pale blood is actually the moon presence, the great one that secretly presides over the hunter's dream. In other words, the goal all along was to seek out this hidden great one to transcend the hunt. The idea here is that only by confronting and overcoming the moon presence can a hunter escape the endless night of the hunt. This aligns with the game's secret ending, in which consuming 3 third umbilical cords allows the hunter to resist the moon presence and defeat it, thus transcending the hunt and even evolving into a new infancy as a great one. It seems that pale blood in this context is the key to breaking free of the nightmare. Essentially, the moon presence itself, or the act of communing with it. From the dual nature of these clues, pale blood has a double meaning. It's at once an event, the pale blood sky, indicating the uncovering of Mensis' nightmare, and an entity, the moon presence itself, that orchestrates the hunter's dream. Both interpretations actually intertwine. The Mensis ritual must be exposed and halted in order to reach the moon presence and end the hunt. The lore even supports this sequence. Master Willem's adage, "Fear the old blood," was ignored by Lawrence, leading to the use of old blood and the scourge of beasts. Thus, Lawrence and his allies eventually sought another solution. They beckoned the moon presence with a special ritual. This is likely how the hunter's dream was created, a pact with a great one born out of desperation to end the beastly scourge. This, of course, is one interpretation of it, though. But The hunter's quest for pale blood can be seen as the fulfillment of that old pact, if we are following this idea. That being, track down the source of the plague, the Mensis nightmare and its newborn Great One, and ultimately confront the moon presence that holds the hunt in its sway. It's a grand, almost hidden narrative arc conveyed through sparse lines. Many players finish Bloodborne not fully grasping what pale blood was, and that's intentional. Pale blood is sort of like the MacGuffin of Bloodborne, a mysterious objective that drives the protagonist forward. Whether one interprets it as the pale sky or the moon presence itself, it symbolizes escape from the night. By seeking pale blood, the hunter sets into motion the events that will unravel Yharnam's darkest secrets and, hopefully, free them from the never-ending hunt. It's yet another testament to From Software's storytelling that the answer is given, but only to those who dig. Pale blood, after all, was there all along, looming above the city as the pale moon, and waiting in the dream as an unfathomable great one. The hunter's dream and the moon presence, a cursed pact. In a lonely workshop lit by moonlight, a one-legged old hunter offers you mercy. The hunter, Gehrman, offers to free you from the hunter's dream, a mystical refuge and workshop that serves as the player's safe haven. The dream feels like a sanctuary, yet it is also a gilded cage. As the game progresses, we learn that this idyllic cottage and its moonlit garden are in fact a creation of a great one, the being known as the moon presence, or as the doll calls in secret, Flora. The dream holds profound unsolved mysteries. Who created it and why? How did Gehrman, the first hunter, become bound here as a surrogate host? And of course, what does the moon presence actually want? These questions lie at the heart of Bloodborne's lore, entwined with the very origin of the hunt. As mentioned previously, according to a note found in the lecture building, Lawrence, the first vicar of the Healing Church, and his colleagues beckoned the moon presence for unknown reasons. This clandestine ritual is further illuminated by relics known as the third umbilical cords. One cord found in the old workshop outright states, "The third umbilical cord precipitated the encounter with the pale moon, which beckoned the hunters and conceived the hunter's dream." In other words, the hunter's dream was born from a pact with the moon presence, using the umbilical cord of a great one as a conduit. Lawrence and his associates seemingly reached out to this great one, perhaps as a last resort to contain the beastly plague they had unleashed with the old blood. But what they received was a mixed blessing. The moon presence created the dream, a pocket dimension where hunters could awaken repeatedly after death. But in exchange, Gehrman was taken captive as the moon presence's host, or caretaker for the dream, and the hunters found within. Thus, this great one bound Gehrman to an endless duty, guiding hunters and slaying them when the hunt's night was over, only for the cycle to repeat with a new hunter. The moon presence itself remains one of Bloodborne's greatest enigmas. Physically, it's an eerie amalgam of bone and sinew, its body writhing, its head writhing with tentacles. Clearly alien in design, at least compared to the usual human or beast we see throughout Yharnam. But its intentions are completely shrouded. One tantalizing note found in the nightmare speaks to its possible agenda: hunt the great ones. This suggests that the moon presence perhaps sought to use hunters as instruments to kill other great ones. As we see throughout our journey, we systematically slaughter a host of cosmic entities, with such being Abriatus, Rom, Murgo's wet nurse, and so on. But could it be that the moon presence, as a great one, had rivals or errors in the natural order that it wanted eliminated? We know that Gehrman's role, and by extension the players', was to halt the source of the spreading scourge of beasts, lest the night carry on forever. The scourge is tied to great ones and their corrupting influence. By empowering hunters through the dream, the moon presence ensured these beasts and failed great ones would be cut down. In this interpretation, the moon presence might be seen as a dark guardian, manipulating mortals to do its cleaning work. Some even speculate that the moon presence is antagonistic to certain other great ones like Oedon, given obscure hints. The official art book notes parallels between the moon presence and Oedon. However, the true motive of the moon presence is left to our imagination. Is it benevolence, containing the plague, or selfish predation, using humans to remove competitors? This is uncertain. However, what is clear is that the hunter's dream is as much a trap as it is a refuge. Gehrman, once a great hunter and founder of the workshop, is now a broken old man longing for sunrise, for death and release. He urges the player to accept being slain by him as a mercy so that the nightmare will end, at least until the next hunter is chosen. And if the player submits, Gehrman will behead them, and they'll awaken back in the real world at dawn, forgetful, as if the nightmare were just a bad dream. The hunt goes on elsewhere, implying another hunter will pick up the blade. However, if instead the player resists and defeats Gehrman, the moon presence itself descends from the sky, an infernal patron coming to claim its hunter. In a normal playthrough, the moon presence subdues the player and binds them in Gehrman's place, even apparently giving them a peg leg for some reason, thus becoming a new tender of the dream, trapped just as Gehrman was. This ending is chilling, of course. The player becomes the new prisoner of the workshop, bound to a wheelchair as the cycle continues. However, Bloodborne offers one step beyond, transcending the hunt. By consuming 3 pieces of umbilical cord, relics of Great One births, the player gains insight enough to resist the moon presence's control. In the final battle, the hunter can slay the moon presence. This is a momentous feat, a mere human augmented by insight and occult blood, and the dying wills of the people of Yharnam, overthrows the Great One that had loomed over Yharnam's nights. In doing so, the hunter breaks the cycle of the dream and becomes something new. The game's final image is the hunter, now an infant Great One. Our new slug-like appearance is cradled lovingly by the doll. Yet, all of this raises as many questions as it answers. Has the moon presence been truly defeated, or have we merely taken its place in the metaphysical hierarchy? And what kind of Great One will the hunter become? I suppose in this case, it's probably open-ended. The greatest RPG trope of all, the player gets to decide how they rule as a Great One, so to speak. But even the doll's gentle care of our new being suggests hope, as if the newborn Great One might become an innocent one. In any case, the hunter's dream and its moon presence master illustrate a beautiful paradox at Bloodborne's core. Salvation attained through the very horror that initiated the nightmare. The dream was a deal with the devil, but in mastering it and slaying its host, a hunter can rewrite fate. The exact nature of the moon presence's pact, why Lawrence sought it, and what terms were struck, remains one of Bloodborne's biggest unsolved lore gaps. We have some small pieces, but not the full picture. What we do know is that the moon presence is the nocturnal lord of the hunt, and until someone was strong enough to stand up to it, the hunt would repeat without end. The hunter's dream stands as a reminder that even the gods of this world have agendas, and using their power comes at a price. The Mensis Ritual and Murgo, Nightmare Newborn. Somewhere within a nightmare, an infant's wail pierces the fabric of reality. In the eerie silence after Rom's defeat, the blood-red moon hangs low, and a baby's crying echoes across the night. This cry belongs to Murgo, the mysterious infant Great One at the heart of the nightmare of Mensis. Stopping Murgo, silencing that harrowing cry, becomes the hunter's urgent task. But why is this spectral newborn so important, and how did a group of scholars manage to ensnare a Great One in the first place? The School of Mensis and their gruesome ritual form one of Bloodborne's most unsettling unsolved mysteries, tying together the themes of forbidden knowledge, childlike Great Ones, and the Beast Plague's source. The School of Mensis was a secretive branch of the Healing Church, led by Provost Mikolash, obsessed with contacting the Great Ones. The School of Mensis conducted a dread ritual in the hidden village of Yahar Ghul, The player uncovers the aftermath. Heaps of corpses draped in ritual cloth, grotesque amalgam corpses like the one reborn, ashes and sand all around, and bizarre snatching creatures roaming the unseen streets. A direct note spells out our goal. Nightmarish rituals crave a newborn. Find one and silence its harrowing cry. Mensis indeed craved a newborn great one, and they got one. Through means not fully explained, Mikuláš's students managed to call Murgo, the infant of a great one, into their fold. A crucial clue comes from one of the umbilical cords, stating that every great one loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate. This cord granted Mensis audience with Murgo, but resulted in the stillbirth of their brains. Mensis apparently obtained a Great One's umbilical cord and used it in a ritual to beckon Murgo's presence. The result was only partial success. They contacted the Great One infant, but it dragged them all into a nightmare realm and obliterated their minds. This, for one thing, is why we find them all as corpses right after defeating the One Reborn. With these actions, Mikuláš and his compatriots became trapped in the nightmare of Mensis, a dream world built from their consciousness, where they endlessly await an audience with their elusive god. When the hunter enters the nightmare of Mensis, we intrude upon this awful success. Mikuláš, alive, or at least active, within the nightmare, raves like a mad prophet through his metal cage helmet. He famously says, Kos, or some say Cosm, do you hear our prayers? With this and many of the other phrases he says throughout his fights, he implores the cosmos to grant him wisdom, to line his brain with eyes. These ravings tie Mensis to Byrgenwerth's philosophy, this being seeking eyes on the inside for enlightenment, and, curiously, to Kos. But the true center of this nightmare is Murgo, an invisible baby cradled by a monstrous wet nurse. The player ascends a gothic tower in an alien realm, the Nightmare's Loft, to find Murgo's wet nurse, a towering great one with skeletal wings and multiple arms holding curved blades. This being isn't the baby, but rather its guardian. The baby itself is formless. We only hear its distressing cries. When the wet nurse is defeated in battle, the infant's crying slowly fades, as the baby is seemingly put back to rest. The player is greeted with the on-screen message, "Nightmare slain," notably different from the usual prey slaughtered. We haven't killed a beast or a kin. We put to end a nightmare. In lore terms, this means Murgo, the infant great one, is either deceased or at least pacified, thus ending the Mensis ritual for good. But why did we ever need to kill Murgo? The game provides hints that as long as the Mensis ritual continued, the scourge of beasts would worsen. One note in Yahar Ghul warns, "The Mensis ritual must be stopped, lest we all become beasts." Indeed. Once Rom's illusion was dispelled and the blood moon became visible, the beast plague intensified throughout Yharnam. The School of Mensis had effectively ripped open the veil separating our world from the Great Ones, and humanity was warping faster into the beasts under the Scarlet Moon's influence. By silencing Murgo, ending that drawn-out cosmic childbirth, the hunter halts whatever metaphysical effect was accelerating the plague. In a way, it's kind of a poetic solution. A hunter of beasts finding that the real beast to be put down was an innocent-sounding baby. And yet, Murgo is not entirely innocent in form. They're an unnatural progeny whose mere existence warps reality. But once Murgo's cry ceases, the blood moon vanishes, and dawn finally breaks soon after. We also receive the third umbilical cord from Murgo's wet nurse as a grim trophy, a literal piece of a Great One infant that Mensis used to call the nightmare. The crisis is over, for now. The story of Murgo is tangled with another tragic figure, Queen Yharnam, the Thumerian monarch. Throughout our journey, we glimpse a veiled woman in a blood-stained wedding dress. This pale woman is Yharnam, and she appears in the Nightmare of Mensis just before Murgo's defeat. In a haunting scene, Queen Yharnam stands, her head raised and looking at Murgo's loft, or more specifically, the cradle where Murgo is located. In ages past, Yharnam herself bore Murgo as a baby, likely through an eldritch union with the Great One Odin, an unseen god of the blood. The childbirth, however, ended in tragedy. Murgo was stillborn, or taken, and Yharnam was left in eternal grief. Her weeping form and the blood on her womb testify to this loss. The scholars of Mensis sought to exploit that tragedy, using an umbilical cord to reach the child's dream. This succeeded only entrapping themselves in a nightmare guarded by the insane Murgo's wet nurse. The wet nurse itself is an enigma, a great one that resembles a faceless reaper. Was it drawn into the ritual to care for Murgo's spirit? Or was it a projection of Mensis' own collective madness, given form to protect the object of their devotion? One thing is for certain, it is indeed a great one, but beyond this, we can't know for sure. What we do know is that Murgo never left the nightmare, and perhaps because they could never exist outside of it. Even Mikolash seems to realize, at the moment of his defeat, that his grand cosmic quest is a failure.
Now I'm waking up! I'll forget everything!
In the end, Mensis did not ascend to live among the Great Ones. Instead, they paid with their sanity. The stillbirth of their brains line is literal. The Mensis scholars' minds were all but destroyed in the real world. Also worth noting, the brain of Mensis, a gigantic brain covered in eyes, also manifests in the nightmare. Possibly the remains of their failed attempt to elevate their brains to godhood, now a mad, pulsing organ we can even slay. But failure or not, we can make contact with the brain of Mensis. And with Great Ones being sympathetic in nature, the brain even gives us a rune. But regardless of all this, the symbolism here is pretty rich. Mensis reached for knowledge meant for gods, and instead of enlightenment, they got a literal monstrosity of a brain and an eternal nightmare of torture. But all that being said, Murgo's story resonates with the larger theme of Great Ones and their lost children. After all, it's said that every Great One loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate. This recurring line in the lore applies to Murgo and Yharnam. Murgo was lost, and in the nightmare, Yharnam's presence lingers, as if still yearning to hold her baby. By granting Murgo release, a kind of a mercy killing, the hunter perhaps also grants Yharnam a measure of peace. Yet, how cruel that our salvation of Yharnam involves killing or pacifying a newborn Great One. This moral complexity is really what makes Murgo's fate an unresolved ache in the lore. We did what had to be done to end the nightmare, but we'll never know what Murgo truly was or what sort of life Murgo might have had as a Great One child. All that remains is a faint cry on the wind, silenced at last, and the somber gratitude of a bereaved mother. The Mensis ritual stands as a cautionary tale. In Bloodborne, humans who try to grasp the divine often invite horror and ruin. Its unsolved pieces, the exact mechanics of the ritual, the nature of the wet nurse, the precise relationship between Odin, Yharnam, and Murgo keep lore enthusiasts, such as ourselves, debating to this day. But one thing is clear for certain: ending Murgo's nightmare is the linchpin that allows the hunt to end. The newborn Great One was the nexus of the curse, and when it's gone, the Red Moon era closes. Nightmare slain, dawn ascends. Kos and the Orphan, a Great One's vengeance at the fishing hamlet.
Curse the fiends, their children too, and their children forever true.
These hateful words, spoken by a woman as we enter the hunter's nightmare. They are the echo of a profound curse, one that unleashed a nightmare upon the hunters who descended upon this seaside village. At the center of this tragedy lies Kos, or some say Cosm, a great one whose corpse washed ashore, and the orphan of Kos, her ill-fated child. The secrets of Kos and the fishing hamlet rank among Bloodborne's greatest lore mysteries. They reveal the sin that ultimately led to the hunter's nightmare, and perhaps changed the course of Yharnam's history. Yet, many questions still linger. Who or what exactly was Kos? Why did the scholars violate her remains? And what became of the orphan's essence after the nightmare ended? Long before the night of the hunt portrayed in the main game, there was an expedition led by Byrgenwerth's scholars, and likely the first hunters like Gehrman and Lady Maria. The scholars and hunters sought out a remote fishing village. In this fishing hamlet, the inhabitants had come into contact with a strange, washed-up entity, the Great One, Kos. Kos is sometimes called a sea deity. Her form appears as a massive, pale, dead figure with humanoid elements. The fishing folk, simple humans, were touched and transformed by Kos's presence. Many of these people had mutated into Piscine, slug-like creatures, gaining the eyes on the inside that Byrgenwerth so desperately sought. Although whether this transformation happened before the scholars came to the fishing hamlet, or is just a visual flare found within the nightmare, is up to some speculation. Regardless, the scholars saw an opportunity in this village. Here was the evidence of a great one. Byrgenwerth's tomb prospectors had already discovered the old blood and the existence of great ones in the chalice dungeons, fueling their lust for more knowledge. With this, words of Kos's corpse on the shore was too enticing to ignore. What followed was nothing short of massacre and blasphemy. The hunters and scholars raided the fishing hamlet. They slaughtered the villagers, even those who had become barely human fish creatures, and they tore apart the inhabitants, taking all the eyes they could find. This gruesome detail indicates they were harvesting eyes from the villagers, likely believing these eyes, imbued with Kos's cosmic influence, would grant insight or aid in ascension. Most horrifically, they defiled Kos's corpse. We aren't told the exact nature of the defilement, but we can infer the scholars attempted to extract something from Kos, perhaps her blood, or perhaps her unborn child. The DLC strongly suggests that Kos had a child, the being we come to know as the Orphan of Kos. At the time of the Hamlet raid, Kos was already dead. Her rotten carcass lay on the beach, but inside her womb was a small, developing great one. The Byrgenwerth scholars presumably didn't realize what they were tampering with. By cutting into Kos, they not only desecrated the Great One's remains, but they doomed her child to a cruel fate. The curse of Kos was swift and terrible. With her dying remnants and the grief of her violated child, Kos, though dead, somehow placed a curse on the hunters. The villagers also cursed the scholars and hunters that raided their village, and with their final words, the resentment of a whole community and the wrath of a great one all coalesced into one of the most powerful curses in the game's lore, the Hunter's Nightmare. Those who participated in the atrocities at the Hamlet became eternally trapped in a nightmare realm as punishment. The hunters that become blood drunk also find themselves within the nightmare. This is why in the Old Hunters DLC we find familiar characters like Ludwig, Lawrence, and Lady Maria in tormented states. They were among the first hunters who sinned either at the Hamlet or via misuse of the old blood. And so, after death, their souls could not find rest. Instead, they haunt a twisted dream version of Yharnam, where beasts and hunters eternally hunt one another as penance. At the end of the Hunter's Nightmare, the player finally reaches the fishing hamlet, which is honestly one of my favorite areas found within the DLC. I kinda wish it was a bit longer. But the Hunter's Nightmare has recreated the hamlet, and it's exactly as it was during that ill-fated raid. There, the curse plays out over and over. The villagers are monstrous and hostile, and the sky storms eternally. At the very depths of the hamlet's nightmare memory, on a beach of blackened water, lies the corpse of Great One Kos, just as it lay long ago. And emerging from her loathsome womb is the Orphan of Kos, a gangly, emaciated humanoid Great One, who immediately attacks the player with anguished fury, lest we all forget that scream. The orphan's design is striking. He appears almost human, a lanky, pale figure who wields his own placenta like a weapon. A weapon which, honestly, I feel like we could have gotten as like some kind of hunter weapon. I mean, there's the amygdala arm. It just makes sense. Like, did anybody else think this? Let me know. Regardless, the orphan never speaks intelligible words. He only screams in a mix of pain and rage. It's as if this child of Kos is eternally enraged by the circumstances of his birth. Or rather, his stillbirth. He was never given a chance at life outside his dead mother, and his existence has been confined to this nightmare, fueled by the curses of the villagers and the hunter's guilt. In essence, the orphan is the embodiment of Kos's curse. The boss battle against the Orphan of Kos is one of the most intense and symbolic in Bloodborne. As the orphan fights, he screams like a tortured child, and eventually, he transforms, summoning lightning from the sky, and his unyielding fury in a second phase that suggests the power of Kos's orphan unleashed. When the hunter finally strikes the orphan down, the creature lets out a last piercing wail and dissolves. In that moment, the sky brightens and the ocean's surface calms. From the corpse of Kos rises a gentle, dark mist, perhaps the spirit of Kos herself, freed at last. A moment later, the player hears a voice. This voice comes from one of the priests found wandering within the hamlet when we first arrive. He states,
"Ah, sweet child of Kos, return to the ocean, a bottomless curse, a bottomless sea, accepting of all that there is and can be."
This poetic line indicates that the orphan's death has lifted the curse. Kos's spirit returns to the cosmos. The ocean, in a way, can be seen as a metaphor for these infinite cosmos, thus taking the curse with her. The bottomless sea has accepted all, meaning the grudge, the nightmare is over. The Great One Kos, wronged so cruelly, finally exacted her vengeance through the curse and can now rest. This haunting tale answers some questions but raises others. We learn why the nightmare was created and how it ended, but what exactly did the scholars gain from Kos? The Bergenworth lore suggests that one scholar made contact with Kos and was rewarded by ascension to kin. One theory suggests that Rom, the vacuous spider, was once a student of Willem's who achieved a sort of ascension. She became a kin of the Great Ones, a lesser Great One herself, seemingly devoid of human intellect, with, as many of you know, vacuous being stupid in literal translation. But this implication is that the contact with Kos, even posthumously, granted Rom incredible insight or metamorphosis into a Great One-like state, a sort of in-between state, in a way, as, again, she wasn't a Great One, but she was kin. After all, we get kin cold blood after defeating her, and not Great One blood. But if all of this is true, that means that the scholars did extract something from Kos's remains. Rom's transformation could have been the result of experiments with Kos's eldritch blood or parasites. We find that Kos's parasitic slugs are a key element in the DLC, as we find them infested in her body. And additionally, we find all of these slugs all over the hamlet. But all of this suggests that the Healing Church in some way was able to harvest Kos's body for powerful insight-granting water or parasites, enabling them to further their astral research. In other words, the atrocity at the hamlet may have propelled the Healing Church's knowledge forward, but at the dire cost of invoking a Great One's wrath. Kos herself remains a mystery. We know her only through the consequences of her death. Was Kos a naturally occurring Great One of the sea, or was she another being who fell from the cosmos? The Hamlet people worshipped her, as their dialogue mentions Kos in reverence or despair. The name Cosmos also has a bit of a ring to it with Cosm, hinting that she is intimately tied to the cosmos at large. Perhaps she was an emissary of the oceanic depths of the universe, an analog to Lovecraftian entities like Mother Hydra or Dagon. Her pallid form might imply she was a creature of water or a void. She's stated as Kos or Cosm by Mikolash, linking her to the very concept of the cosmic infinite. But all we have are interpretations. Bloodborne leaves Kos mostly unexplained, which is pretty fitting for a being worshipped as a deity by the Hamlet folk. The orphan of Kos also invites sympathy and curiosity. It is one of the only Great Ones we fight that appears wholly human in shape. This could imply that the Great Ones born of humans, if Kos's child has some sort of a human aspect to them, are able to take on a human form. Or it simply could be a stylistic choice to portray the orphan as a kind of everyman victim. Or perhaps there's even the link with Gehrman, and the nightmare is only representing the orphan in a sort of dreamlike way, where that's not its literal form. I mean, that's hard to say. We can find that the doll mentions that Gehrman is sleeping sounder once we defeat the orphan. Whether that's a direct link to the orphan or it's just that the curse has been silenced, that's really anybody's guess. But regardless of all that, the orphan's anguished behavior and emaciated appearance certainly make it one of the most tragic figures in the game. When they die, we don't get an umbilical cord from them, presumably because we were witnessing a memory or a dream reenactment of the orphan's death, and it's not the first time this has happened. In the physical world, the orphan likely never had a chance to be born alive. This, of course, is also another unsolved detail. Did the scholars physically remove Kos's child back then? If so, what happened to it? One theory is that they took the orphan's corpse or cord, and that it became the very umbilical cord later used by Gehrman and Lawrence to contact the moon presence. However, the official text doesn't confirm this, so it remains speculation that the orphan's cord passed through the healing church's hands, as so many other vile deeds have. So, all we can say for sure is that the orphan existed in the nightmare, and by putting that tortured child to rest, the hunter brought closure to a centuries-old crime. Thus, the fishing Hamlet stands as one of Bloodborne's clearest examples of divine retribution, a great one wronged, and in turn, cursed an entire lineage of hunters. It also fleshes out the theme that great ones are alien but not completely unfeeling. Kos didn't simply die and vanish. She responded to the suffering inflicted on her and her kin. The nightmare curse was her vengeful miracle, and when we lift that curse, it feels like a melancholic reconciliation. But the question of who was Kos and what might humanity have learned if they hadn't angered her lingered poignantly. The orphan's cries and the old villager's curse still echo in our minds long after. A dark lullaby about hubris and remorse. So, among Bloodborne's unsolved mysteries, the tale of Kos is actually relatively complete in terms of cause and effect. Yet it remains open-ended enough that we still ponder the exact nature of Kos's power and the full impact of the hunter's sin. The bottomless curse of Kos has finally ended, but its nightmare serves as a grim lesson. In the hunt for great ones, beasts are not only monsters, humans can be monstrously cruel as well, and even gods remember injustice. Formless Odin, the unseen Lord of Blood. One name that recurs ominously throughout Bloodborne, yet is never seen or fought, is Odin. Described as formless, Odin is a great one who exists only as a formless voice or presence, entwined with the sacred blood of Yharnam. Odin's name is enshrined in the city. The Healing Church's grand chapel is called Odin Chapel, and the worshippers gather there, perhaps unknowingly praying to this invisible god. Carol runes carved from Odin's speech grant hunters powers like increased bullet capacity and the ability to leech blood echoes, the dying wills of those we slay. The mysteries surrounding Odin are legion. What is this great one's goal? How does a being without form exert such influence? And could it be that Odin's unseen hand is responsible for the blood plague itself? Well, let's start with the runes that tell us about Odin. The formless Odin rune states, "The Great One Odin, lacking form, exists only in voice and is symbolized by this rune." It further notes that Odin and his inadvertent worshippers seek the precious blood. Odin is essentially a being of pure spirit, or pure blood. He's ascended to an even higher plane than even most great ones, achieving a kind of omnipresence. Being formless, he can never be encountered in a boss fight or seen physically, truly making him a Lovecraftian entity whose whispers can only be heard from the darkness. Yet, Odin's presence is felt everywhere in Yharnam by those who know where to look. For example, as mentioned, The Odin Writhe rune lets hunters viscerally steal blood echoes from enemies. This suggests Odin's parasitic delight in bloodletting through the hunter. Those who have Odin's rune literally carry a fragment of Odin's essence in their minds, unknowingly doing his bidding by spilling blood. But the most glaring evidence of Odin's meddling is the miraculous pregnancies during the blood moon. As the scholars say, when the Great Ones descend, a womb will be blessed with a child. In Yharnam, two notable women can become pregnant out of nowhere once the blood moon rises. One is Ariana, the gentle prostitute found in the cathedral ward. Ariana is a descendant of the vile bloods of Cainhurst, as implied by her noble bearing and the nature of her blood. After the blood moon appears, Ariana ends up giving birth to a horrifying, squirming infant, clearly a creature of the Great Ones, with tentacles and a misshapen form. This infant form can also be found in the upper cathedral ward, in the location the choir held so sacred, where others of these infants wander the grounds. However, with Ariana's child, this infant is presumed to be Odin's, but why? Well, there is one crucial item. One of the third umbilical cords obtained by killing Ariana's abomination of a baby mentions that every Great One loses its child and yearns for a surrogate, and Odin, the formless Great One, is no different. To think that it was corrupted blood that began this eldritch liaison. This single quote ties together several points of lore. Odin longs for a child, just as any Great One does. Odin impregnated Ariana, and he was able to do so because of corrupted blood. Ariana's blood is described as thick human blood with healing properties, likely tainted with the old blood and possibly the Cainhurst bloodline's corruption. It seems Odin can only interact through blood. He has no form, only voice, and blood is his medium. Thus, by imbibing Ariana's blood, one might unknowingly facilitate Odin's influence. Ariana's profession as a blood minister, of sorts, who shares blood with many, could have given Odin the channel he needed to surreptitiously fertilize her womb. Indeed, Odin's followers or worshippers don't even realize they serve him. Any who exalt in blood for blood's sake are essentially carrying out Odin's will. The Healing Church, which spreads healing blood like a sacrament, may ironically have been spreading Odin's reach across the city. Odin's goal, like all Great Ones, is to have a child. The line, "every Great One loses its child," applies to Odin as well, implying he once had and lost an offspring. Or, by that nature, he cannot sire one successfully. So he seeks surrogates among humans. We see it with Ariana, and we infer it with Queen Yharnam. The Thumerian Queen Yharnam gave birth to Murgo, with Odin likely as the father. Murgo was lost, stillborn in reality, continuing the tragic pattern. Hundreds of years later, maybe even 1,000, who's to say, Odin tries again with Ariana, and that too ends in tragedy, as her child is either killed by the player or dies shortly after birth. The loss of Odin's offspring is essentially inevitable. It seems perhaps due to Odin's own inability to take form and properly protect them. Even the umbilical cord from Ariana's baby asserts that the liaison was eldritch and begun by corrupted blood. If we refer to the Japanese translation directly, corrupted blood is literally impure blood, or kegare, which in Bloodborne refers to the Cainhurst blood, the vile blood taint, or in Japanese, kegareta ketsuzoku. So it's darkly poetic that Odin, a Great One who is essentially blood itself, can only spawn a child through impure bloodlines, and even then, the result is an abomination fated to die. Another intriguing aspect of Odin is the Odin Chapel and the tomb in front of it. The chapel, which serves as a hub for survivors if the player sends them there, might actually be built on Odin's direct tomb. In the game, there is a large plaque in front of the chapel that looks like a headstone, and one particular myth in the fanbase is that Odin's corpse or resting place lies under Cathedral Ward, where the blood was first found. The Thumerian society worshipped and interacted with Great Ones in their tombs, after all. There's even some people that consider that since Odin has a tomb in the game, Odin has possibly even died. So if Odin died or transcended his need for a body, he might have left remains or just a reverence site. The truth of this, of course, is completely unclear, but it's interesting to consider that the Healing Church built its grandest chapel in the name of Odin, almost as if acknowledging the power of blood. Additionally, the choir in the upper echelons of the church spoke often of blood saints and forbidden blood, so it could be that Odin is the source of the old blood, but that, of course, is completely speculative. But regardless, let's take a look at this. Bergenworth's tomb prospectors found the old blood in the depths of the labyrinth, so they also found great ones there. Perhaps in a forgotten cavern, they found Odin's blood, or a slumbering Odin's altar. Lawrence took that old blood to heal people, not realizing he was distributing the essence of a great one. So if this is true, this could explain why the blood healing turns people into beasts. It's not just a disease, it's the side effect of channeling a great one's essence improperly. While this theory isn't confirmed outright, we do know Odin is deeply tied to blood, and the beast scourge is tied to blood, so, one-to-one, so many fans easily draw a connection. While this theory isn't confirmed outright, we do know Odin is deeply tied to blood, and the beast scourge is also tied to blood. So, there's a comparison there. But even without that theory, Odin's fingerprints are all over Yharnam's calamities. The scourge of beasts might partly be attributed to Odin's intervention. Consider this: the Mensis ritual made the plague worse, right? But why does blood ministration lead to beastly transformation in the first place? The Healing Church believed the old blood was a gift from the gods, the Great Ones, and if that blood of the gods is actually the blood of Odin, then every infusion is a silent pact with Odin himself. The more Yharnamites use the blood, the more beastly and delirious they become, intoxicated with its sickly sweet smell. So perhaps this all reflects on Odin's growing influence, or the inherent corruptive nature of a Great One's blood on human bodies. It's no coincidence that Gascoigne, upon going too far with the blood, loses himself entirely to a beastly form, or that the blood-starved beast was likely a former clergy who overindulged. Odin desiring more offspring or more presence could be driving people to bloodlust and thus to beasthood, which then prompts more hunting and more bloodshed in a vicious circle. There's also an interesting parallel in names. Odin bears resemblance to Odin, the Norse god, and also the word Odion or odium, a place of voice. The rune description suggests the latter, noting Odin might be a riff on a word meaning music or voice hall, but as a deity influencing a major religion, the church in this case, and demanding sacrifices, blood, Odin does feel like a dark god watching from behind the scenes. The blindfolded church servants, like the choir, members who wear blindfold caps, possibly blind themselves to better hear Odin and the Great One's voices. In fact, the term Odin Chapel might have been literal, a chapel where the formless voice could be heard by initiates. We hear from Gehrman directly about ascending to Odin Chapel, as a hint to find the workshop and the relics found within. Gehrman may have been hinting that the secret to the blood and a cord lay in Odin's chapel, perhaps implying the umbilical cord in the workshop was tied to Odin's lost child in some way. While concrete answers about Odin are scarce, one can deduce his significance by the narrative weight of his actions. He's likely the father of Murgo, Yharnam's child, which caused the Mensis nightmare. He is explicitly the father of Ariana's doomed child. He is the unseen patron of blood ministration. If the moon presence is the master of the hunt, Odin could be the unseen master of the scourge, an opposite number in a sense. And intriguingly, the official art book apparently hints that the moon presence might be related to Odin. This potentially means that the two could even be facets of one entity or one's evolution. Of course, this is completely speculative, but the art book caption noted a design similarity. In the end, Odin remains unsolved, and that's likely deliberate. He's the Lovecraftian figure that is never confronted or definitively proven to exist, very much like Lovecraft's god Azathoth, who sits at the center of creation unseen. We see the consequences of Odin's existence: pregnancies, runes, blood crazes, but never the being. If Bloodborne's world continued beyond the game, one could imagine an even greater hunt to deal with Odin himself. But as it stands, the formless Great One lingers in the shadows, very much alive and active even after the night ends. After all, there is no indication we stopped Odin's machinations. Perhaps the greatest mystery is whether Yharnam can ever be truly free of Odin's influence. As long as humans seek the precious blood and the Great One yearns for children, Odin will be there, formless and patient, whispering in the blood. In Bloodborne's tapestry of tragedy, Odin is the quiet thread running through it all, unbroken, unyielding, and largely unknown. The Scourge of Beasts. Fear the Old Blood and the Undying Plague. At the core of Bloodborne's horror is the Scourge of Beasts, the terrible affliction that transforms humans into nightmarish creatures. From the howling werewolf-like beasts of central Yharnam to the misshapen cleric beasts and beyond, the plague ravages the city by night, necessitating the hunter's bloody work. But what truly causes people to turn into beasts? The game presents a tangle of influences. The Healing Church's blood ministration, the appearance of the Red Moon, the sins of Mensis, perhaps even the meddlings of Great Ones. The exact origin and mechanism of the Scourge remains an unsolved mystery, woven in myth and cautionary tales. However, through lore and item descriptions, we can piece together a narrative of the plague's rise, one that ultimately circles back to the ominous warning, "Fear the Old Blood." There's been plenty mention already about Odin and Great Ones and where the blood comes from, but the Old Blood is where it all began. As the Byrgenwerth scholars delved beneath Yharnam, they discovered in the ancient Pthumerian labyrinth a miraculous substance, blood of immense healing and empowering properties. Provost Willem, the head of Byrgenwerth, realized this old blood belonged to the Great Ones and sensed danger in it, hence his famous admonition to his student Lawrence. "Fear it, Lawrence. By the gods, fear the old blood." Lawrence unfortunately did not listen. He believed humanity could evolve by using the blood and left Byrgenwerth to found the Healing Church, bringing blood ministration to the masses. At first, this seemed like a divine gift. The blood healed the sick, cured ailments. The Healing Church grew in power, and blood became Yharnam's lifeblood, pun intended. Yet, Willem's warning was not baseless. The old blood carried a terrible curse. Overuse of it began to change people, turning them into beasts. We see evidence of this in the game's beginning. The hunter's own blood transfusion triggers a vision of a beast and tiny messengers, a sign that the old blood has awakened something bestial within. Gilbert, another outsider, tells us the grisly truth, that the town's inhabitants were cured of sickness, only to succumb to the scourge of the beast. Indeed, healing and curse were two sides of the same coin. The exact mechanism by which the old blood causes beasthood is not fully spelled out, but we can interpret it through context. Bloodborne draws on the notion that humanity's worst aspects, rage, savagery, the beast within, are amplified by tainted blood. The old blood, being inhuman, has a transformative effect. It's as if the blood carries an animalistic curse. In Old Yharnam, we learn of the first outbreak. A note left by a powder keg hunter reads, "The Red Moon hangs low, and beasts rule the streets. Are we left no other choice than to burn it all to cinders?" This refers to the night Old Yharnam was put to the torch. The Healing Church hunters, led by Gehrman's protege, Lawrence, and assisted by hunters like Jera, decided to exterminate the entire district of Old Yharnam by fire. The note mentions the red moon hanging low, strongly implying that a blood moon or near blood moon was present during that first scourge. The red moon's presence correlates with beastly transformations intensifying. It appears that the blood itself is not the sole factor. The phase of the moon and perhaps the intervention of great ones, like Odin's influence or Murgo's impending arrival, exacerbate the condition. In gameplay, this is shown by how after Rom's illusion is broken and the red moon descends, certain NPCs rapidly transform or go insane. But from all this beastly scourge business, we can actually trace a bit of a timeline. The Ashen Blood disease, a rampant sickness found within Old Yharnam, once plagued Yarnamites, and the church cured it with blood ministrations. However, this only caused things to worsen. All of this is eluded by Old Yarnum's lore and the item the antidote, something that heals poisoning, which mentions ashen blood. So the church may have saved the city from one plague by inadvertently causing another more horrifying one, that is. After Old Yarnum's burning, the church covered up the scourge as best they could. Hunters became an institutionalized necessity, working in shadows to call any beasts that appeared. But the problem never truly went away. It simmered under the surface, in the Healing Church's own ranks even. Lawrence, the founder, was afflicted, and in the Old Hunters DLC, we find him as a monstrous flaming cleric beast, suggesting he was one of the first victims of Beast Patient Zero, so to speak. His cleric beast form and the beast's embrace rune imply that those deeply imbued with beast blood can transform into higher order beasts with burning blood. The Healing Church continued to administer blood to the populace. It was their source of authority, after all, while secretly developing antidotes and hunts to manage the side effects. They even established medical wards like the Research Hall to study patients who were mutating, trying to find a cure or evolve them into something else. So the Scourge of the Beast is both a medical phenomenon and a cosmic curse. On one hand, it's like a bloodborne disease, again pun intended, an infection you contract by taking old blood. On the other, it's clearly tied to the sins against nature, using the blood of the old gods, in the presence of great ones like the Moon Presence and Murgo. So when the Mensis ritual reached its climax, it threatened to turn all of us into beasts, as one last note warns. That suggests that the Great One's nightmare newborn, Murgo, exerted an influence that worsened the blood plague. Perhaps the logic is the Great One's proximity, like a descending red moon, causes those with tainted blood to lose themselves entirely to beastly instinct. In simpler terms, the red moon acts as a full moon does traditionally in werewolf lore, triggering the final transformation. By putting Murgo to rest and ending the Mensis nightmare, we remove that extreme influence and dawn breaks. But does that really cure the beast scourge? Potentially, not completely. It just prevents it from escalating to consume everyone. Those already blood-addled might still turn in the future, which brings us to the final, perhaps unanswerable question. Is the Scourge of Beasts over? One of Bloodborne's endings, where Gehrman frees you and you awake at morning, leaves Yharnam with many beasts slain, the church in shambles, much of Yharnam's populace decimated, and the Red Moon itself is gone. But the old blood is still in circulation, unless the church's collapse halts it. There may be pockets of refined blood out there still, and who knows if another Mensis-like event could happen. In the secret ending of the game, when the hunter becomes a Great One infant, it symbolically is a new beginning. One could imagine that with the Moon Presence gone, the source of the hunt cycles is eliminated. The Healing Church's reign is ended, as we likely killed many of its leaders and former members. So it's possible Yharnam will face a reckoning when the truth of blood healing comes out. After all, what must Yharnam look like to an outsider? Oh yeah, my cousin lives in Yharnam, or oh yeah, I'm gonna go to Yharnam and do some trading, and then the whole fucking town is just destroyed. Like, practically everybody is just dead. Regardless, Bloodborne doesn't show us any kind of an epilogue, and the plague's exact cure is never found in game. All things considered, there is a fascinating perspective in Bloodborne's lore of beasthood versus kinhood. Beasts represent degeneration, losing oneself to base instinct, whereas kin, those who become like the Great Ones, represent ascension beyond humanity via insight. Master Willem's path was to use eyes or insight to transcend. Lawrence's path was to use blood to evolve, but it instead made humans regress. The Scourge of Beasts can be seen as humanity's failed attempt at evolution, using a brute-forced method gone awry. So the unsolved part is, was this failure inevitable, or could it have been controlled? The choir, for instance, tried to use diluted old blood, blood refined by blood saints, to avoid beast transformation. They also looked to the stars and attempted ascension, by contacting Kos or Ebrietas, however you want to say it. This, of course, leading to kin transformations and brain damage, but not beastliness. The Executioners versus Vileblood's feud also underscores that the church saw the Cainhurst's use of blood as heresy, maybe because it wasn't their sanctioned way or because it could lead to something even worse. So, in summary, the Scourge's origin can be attributed to Lawrence's hubris with the Old Blood. The Scourge's spread is exacerbated by cosmic events and by continued blood misuse. The exact agent in the blood that causes beast mutation is not given a name. It could be a parasite, a pathogen, or simply arcane corruption, but maybe it's best left mysterious. The takeaway is what Willem warned: fear the Old Blood. And so, the plague of beasts is a man-made or great one-made disaster that might never be fully undone. The ending of Bloodborne is ambiguous as to whether normal humans in Yharnam will recover or if the city will collapse. Can Yharnam even be rebuilt after this great catastrophe? I kinda have the feeling probably not, but as it is, the Old Blood made the city great and destroyed it in equal measure. If any mystery remains truly unsolved, it's perhaps whether Yharnam's people will learn from this nightmare or continue the cycle again. With the Great One's influence receding at the game's end, perhaps the healing blood will lose its potency, which might be a mercy. Or perhaps some enterprising survivor will bottle the remaining Old Blood and start the deceit anew elsewhere. As for us, we're left with a cautious optimism that the dawn means something, but we also carry the knowledge that as long as humans seek shortcuts to power or healing, the Old Blood's temptation will loom, and with it, the beasts within every man will arise.